Hey all, let's learn about Farum Azula with the Tarnished Archaeologist. Man in his arrogance thinks himself a great work, worthy of the interposition of a deity. Charles Darwin. Why would he quote Darwin? Twice. More humble, and I believe truer, to consider him created from animals. Oh, it was the same quote. You know what sucks about Darwin is he's right. In science, when things are called a theory, people screw this up all the time. It's a hypothesis when you just make up something and then you test it and you test it and you test it. And when it's tested accurately every time, 100% of the time, it is called a theory. It's not, the word isn't used the same way as we use it in just like common talk. Like the theory of evolution is called that because 100% of the time it's proven accurate. Also, Charles Darwin was a racist. He was like, he would use his work to try to show the difference between like that people of European descent were evolved. It's kind of sucks when you have like historical shit like that. Farum Azula, the first golden society. The first golden society.
From the very first moment we step into the vast open world of the lands between, we can see the scattered ruins of a mysterious temple in the sky, strewn across the landscape. The nature and origin of these ruins was once one of the earliest tantalizing archaeological details that drew us to the history of the lands between.
Do you remember the point where you realize that all the shit that's like fallen down from the sky is actually from Farum Azula?
When we do finally arrive there, Farum Azula is no less a stunning mystery. An entire city suspended in the sky, said to have been built as a mausoleum for the ancient dragon lord, now cool. Forever crumbling after a meteor impacted it long ago. Who were its inhabitants? Why did they build this temple? The only current inhabitants, besides the swarms of dragons flying...
Do you think a meteor impacting it and blowing it apart had something to do with the skies and how Radon like tried to stop the stars and stuff? He was trying to hold back like the dragons or something? Maybe. That's a hypothesis. Way out there, I know.
Ahead are the so-called beastmen, who we technically can encounter early on in Limgrave as bosses, but who many players are likely to first encounter here, in their home in the sky.
Where do we encounter them?
We have made a
down in a
striking
dungeon?
discovery that the civilization of beastmen is made after a real Copper Age society that made a marvelous technological breakthrough that fascinates to this day. The thesis of this video, based on the archaeological evidence, is that the beastmen of Farum Azula are the first society in the world of Elden Ring to harness the power of gold. And the implications of this realization will help us achieve a new understanding of the lands between in the time before the Age of the Erdtree.
The power of gold. Chapter 1, the gift of intelligence. So obviously in Elden Ring, gold is powerful. It is used for many things, like golden needles and the golden Erdtree, the golden order. Like gold has a power beyond just transaction, like used as a currency.
We know from the bestial vitality item description, which reads, quote, "Having gained intelligence, the beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold," end quote. That the beastmen were first granted intelligence by some higher power, resulting in the formation of society and a loss of their inherent wildness. In real-world prehistory, that is to say, before the written word, the transition from hunter-gatherer groups to more sophisticated societal arrangements, even before the advent of farming, is heralded by more complex burial rituals. As human societies became more complex, they started burying their dead, often associated with ritual sacrifices or burial with sacred objects.
I never really understood this. You could tell that obviously it was like bones and stuff. I thought it was like some sort of religious, like, yeah, a sacrificial area or whatever. But then there's just dirt laying in it and bones, and they're not covered up. Like they just let the body sit here and rot in the air. That would smell awful. It just seemed kind of strange to me that it wasn't like mummified in any way or laid down in like some sort of like a liquid or something.
There's some evidence that our cousins,
amber or something like that,
the Neanderthals, even started to do this as well before their eventual extinction. Just so, though the current beastmen of Farum Azula seem to have reverted back to a state of wildness, often seen hunched over on all fours, scavenging remains,
Yeah.
cannibalizing their own history.
That doesn't mean that they're not smart. They're wearing clothes, they have weapons. Just maybe their bodies haven't evolved through their intelligence linearly, you know?
The unmistakable hallmarks of complex society they built after having initially been granted intelligence linger in the ruins of Farum Azula. All throughout the area, we see fossilized skeletons embedded into rock and
Everywhere,
walls,
the whole ground.
well as
Yeah, check this out. The entire ground of the entire boss arena is just, fossilized
a
bones.
variety of dedicated burial chambers involving both burial and display, often on ritual altars or pedestals, and importantly, of individual beastmen.
Well, I kind
Several
of,
skeletons are shown bound to adjacent
I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot on this one, but I thought, actually, I always do this on the Tarnished Archaeologist videos. Gives me a lot to think about. The entire place has dead bodies. It's sort of like the way it's designed. I kind of assume the entire place was like a giant mausoleum. They sort of said that in the intro, but that's even just what I assumed when playing the game. Like there's just dead bodies in like these little areas and stuff. These little like, I don't know, they're not a coffin or a casket, but like this thing that they're laying on. They're all over the place.
pillars in a manner clearly evocative of the Stone Age
Oh, wow, look at that.
society in Demon Souls' Shrine of Storms and their cult of hero burial and resurrection. And, with the possible exception of those entombed in the architecture itself, all the beastmen buried in Farum Azula have ornate gold jewelry, a
Yeah.
very specific and informative design choice, because, as it turns out, we've discovered that these burials actually exist.
Okay. Chapter 2, the Varna Necropolis. They're all dead, too. Which
The
I guess
real-world inspiration
I guess that makes sense from a lore standpoint. Destined Death does exist, or did exist, prior to the Erd Tree, right? So people actually died here.
for the Farum Azula burials is the Varna Necropolis.
Wow.
Initially discovered accidentally in the 1970s in modern-day Bulgaria, this site proved to be one of the most stunning in all of archaeology. The excavators found a series of graves dating to the mid-5th millennium BC, in which each of the bodies was buried with a remarkable array of gold jewelry.
It's wild.
Some of the tombs had no body at all, only a symbolic grave, but still contained gold trinkets.
Have you ever looked up how difficult it is to make gold? Like, you have to have a full functioning society. You can't be no like hunter-gatherer dude, because the time and effort it takes to get like all of the stone, heat it, melt it, do all the shit to actually get a gold ore separated out of dirt, basically, is fascinatingly difficult. Like, the fact that we even figured this stuff out is crazy to me.
Not until they came across burial number 43 did the team realize the full magnificence of their find.
Now, what's
This burial
different about
held
this?
a man, evidently of much power and prestige, buried among such an astonishing amount of gold that, literally, there was more gold jewelry in this one burial site than in all other prehistoric sites combined.
Oh.
The man was buried with gold bracelets, necklaces, other trinkets, even a gold condom.
Well then.
3,000 gold artifacts were found, amounting to 6 kilograms of gold, an absolutely astonishing amount for any era, let alone 6,000 years ago. If we compare the graves of Farum Azula to Varna Necropolis, we can plainly see the inspiration.
Yeah.
The skeletons are arranged with similar placements, and importantly, framed in individual graves. The golden jewels bear striking similarities, from the golden bracelets right down to the circular trinkets, which are actually identical.
It does seem clear.
Buried within the Varna graves, there are copper
There's this
tools
condom.
as well, recognizable by their characteristic green rust, identifying this society as from the Copper Age or Chalcolithic era. In the real world, These societies were the transition states between the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, after farming had developed, but before the widespread use of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Likewise, we can see in the Dragon Temple of Farum Azula the unmistakable evidence of copper usage, consistent with a Chalcolithic society.
Yeah, definitely. The green walls obviously would have been copper, but copper turns green over time if you're not like scrubbing it and cleaning it. Yeah, so that's the way that is. I wonder, because they talked about farming and stuff here. I wonder how that could be. Like in Farum Azula, there's no farms. Like there's nothing like that. And again, it seems like a giant mausoleum of sorts. Did they come back and forth? Did they go here for burials and then go back to wherever they actually live? Or are we supposed to believe that they always lived here? And of course, I assume maybe prior to the meteor, there could have been like floating giant farmlands and things like that. But I don't know. I don't really see any evidence of that within the level design.
Interestingly, in real-world prehistory, before the advent of more sophisticated metallurgy, societies and peoples predominantly relied on the most easily accessible metals for the production of jewelry, and importantly, they did not produce alloys by heating and mixing different metals together. In other words, all the gold in Varna is unalloyed.
Wow. That was a real educational moment for me. Holy cow.
A common theory to explain the prevalence of gold in the Earth's crust is that the majority of gold derives from a massive meteorite shower around 3.9 billion years ago.
I just learned what unalloyed actually meant. That is insane. It's not an alloy made from heating and everything. It's just gold found in like gold veins in the ground. Wow, I totally did not know that.
NASA is even sending a probe to investigate 16 Psyche, an asteroid thought to contain massive amounts of metal, including gold. Perhaps these are the inspiration for the Elden Beast, who is said to have been brought to the lands between on a golden star. Just as the Copper Age cultures on Earth first learned to use the gold from predominantly meteorite sources, so the beastmen of Farum Azula learned the power of gold sent from the heavens. So, Farum Azula is actually in modern-day Bulgaria. Well, not exactly, of course. But the developers' decision to use this style of burial, so clearly evocative of the Varna burial site in particular, does carry certain fascinating implications. When the Varna discoveries were first reported, they caused something of a sensation. It was shown in exhibition across many countries in Europe and North America.
I bet people like gold.
In 1982, a 7-month stint in Japan with the title The Oldest Gold in the World, and accompanied by a large publicity tour.
That's kind of a ridiculous thing to say, like, gold is as old as everything in the world, right? Like, whenever gold is created in the ground, like, that's how old gold is. So it's not the old, maybe it's obviously like maybe the oldest golden jewelry that was made. Again, I don't really know if that's true.
It is no stretch to think that this would have made quite an impression on then 8-year-old Hidetaka Miyazaki.
I always think about George R.R. Martin, actually, when I think about the writings.
So what does it mean
before the age
that
of
the developers used Varna as a template? Well, for one, it evokes the image of the oldest gold in the world, clearly meant to convey not just that Farum Azula is old in general, but that this society was the first, the oldest, to recognize the power of gold in the lands between.
I really hope
gold
that
not only adorns the buried.
I really hope that the Tarnished Archaeologist's idea here of it being an old and being based on Varna and stuff like that, I really hope that's true, because if it is, that's a really cool way to like think about Farum Azula and develop it visually and from a lore standpoint.
Figures, but also the tapestries, even the dragons themselves. Many of the remaining beastmen who roam the crumbling ruins wear similar gold jewelry as in the burial chambers.
Yeah.
And in this fictional world, gold means but one thing: the influence of the Greater Will and its emissary, the Elden Beast.
Right.
Of course, we already knew there was some influence of the Greater Will, as in the heart of the temple there exists an earlier version of the Elden Ring, not to mention the Dragon Lord Remembrance, which states, quote, "The Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return."
That's right, it
End
does
quote.
say that. I always think about him as being like the ruler, but it does say he was the Elden Lord. It's really interesting.
If there is both an Elden Ring...
The Golden Order is based around an existing like civilization. Like, that's kind of interesting that it just shows up and it's just like, oh, we're gonna work exactly like you used to, tear it down and build it back up the same way.
and an Elden Lord in the age of Farum Azula. The influence of the Greater Will is clear. So it appears what happened here was that the beasts were granted intelligence by the Greater Will, and its emissary, the Elden Beast, which explains their obsession with gold. And they developed a society using this newly gained intelligence. They began to use stone tools, as stated by the bestial sling incantation. Quote, "It is said that in the time before the Erd Tree, stones were the first weapons of beasts who had gained intelligence."
Yeah,
End
and
quote.
you know, that's true.
The
We
use
know
of
that from like primitive archaeological sites and stuff like that. Like, you just basic tools, rocks, sticks, things put together, you know. That makes sense.
Tools was a symbol of their intelligence, in other words, their transformation from wild beasts into something more akin to humans. The Cinque Dea makes this clear. Quote, "The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their time."
Wow.
End quote.
I did not come across this. I don't believe in my playthrough. That's a really cool looking weapon. They like to take like body parts and make weapons a lot in this. Obviously, this one's a hand, and there are multiple swords that are that we learned from. Well, I learned it in like some other videos that I've watched on the channel that are like torsos, and they're basically the handle is like the head, and then the shoulder width comes out, and it goes to a point. Like, that shit is insane. They have a lot of that in this game.
In other words, the symbol of intelligence is the use of all 5 fingers, necessary for the making and using of tools, whereas the claw mark, representing their bestial wrath, contains only 3 marks instead of the full 5.
Yeah. And gross hair.
And above all else, they began to bury their dead with gold ornamentation. These are the hallmarks of a nascent civilization, of culture in its essence, the use of tools and the development of burial rituals. We also see from the various statues depicting dragons in monumental prestige, flanked by beastmen attendants, that a hierarchy
They worship
developed
the
in Farum
dragons.
Azula.
Yeah.
Apparently, with the beastmen serving their dragon lords.
Sure.
The Farum Azula beastmen ashes support this notion, as they state, quote, "These ruins are said to be the remains of a giant mausoleum enshrining an ancient dragon, guarded by chosen beastmen who wield weapons clad in lightning," end quote, indicating that the primary function
This is the best boss arena in any FromSoft game. IMO.
of Farum Azula was worship of the dragons, and that the beastmen were granted intelligence in order to guard and serve their dragon overlords. But even within the beastmen themselves, there's a suggestion of hierarchy, as attested to by the ornate gold jewelry that surely not all beastmen could afford. Just like in Grave 43 of Varna, the development of such clear emblems of social rank and hierarchy is yet another hallmark of nascent civilization.
Chapter 4, The Fall of Farum Azula.
In Farum Azula, we see the beginning of civilization and its entire arc compressed into a single location. The granting of intelligence and the shedding of bestial traits, the first use of tools, and the development of burial practices. More importantly, the Varna burials in Farum Azula show us that this is the original use of unalloyed gold.
Burial.
But then, in Farum Azula, all was eventually lost. As the Ruins Greatsword tells us, The city was destroyed by a meteorite, now doomed to slowly crumble in perpetuity. At some point, the Beastmen began to revert back to their wild state, eventually having lost the blessing of intelligence once the city was impacted and the dragon Elden Lord's god was fled.
Do you think there's a link between the unalloyed gold and how it affects the Scarlet Rot throughout the entire game, and then how much they care about the unalloyed gold here in Farum Azula?
But nor are they granted the closure that most great civilizations receive after their fall. For in the vortex of time that is Farum
After their fall and he falls,
they
he
roam
planned that.
forever in the remains of their once great city,
Whack.
ignorant of the fact that it is they who built it. And yet, the power of an idea can never be fully extinguished, and many eons later, the potency of unalloyed gold was rediscovered by a certain Empyrean in his attempt to combat
I'm having trouble listening to him. That is not the clip I would have put in this video. He's getting his ass kicked.
the outer gods. But that is a story for another day.
Man, I really like this guy's videos. Like, they're really good, right? Man. I'm going to watch more. I'm going to try to bounce back and forth a little bit. I'm trying to watch some other recommendations that I have, but I'm not done with Tarnished Archaeologist, so stick around, subscribe if you haven't. I'm going to get more coming soon. See you then. Bye.